The way to right wrongs is to turn the light of truth upon them. Ida B. Wells, Barnett. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for the Defense Health Agency's Women's Equality Day Observance. I'm Christianne Whitten, Chief of Internal Communications for the Defense Health Agency, and it is my pleasure and honor to be with you alongside our Director, Lieutenant General Ronald J. Place, and my colleague, Paul Reynolds, Program Manager for the Force Resilience Office, the DHA Program Office for Anti-Harassment, Anti-Extremism, Diversity and Inclusion, Military Equal Opportunity, and Sexual Assault Awareness and Response. Our theme for today's observance is Empowered Women, Strengthening the Nation, and I'm honored to be joined by Brigadier General Mary V. Krueger, Commanding General at Regional Health Command, Atlantic. Before I continue, please be advised we are recording today's session on Microsoft Teams. The recording will be available on Teams and on Inside DHA at the conclusion of this event. Please remember to keep yourself muted until we open up the floor for your questions. You can also post your questions and comments in the chat. I'd like to start with a brief overview of the history behind Women's Equality Day, which celebrates the ratification of the 19th Amendment on August 26, 1920, which gave women the right to vote. This amendment changed federal law and the face of the American electorate forever. In July 1848, the Seneca Falls Convention assembled to begin advocacy work for women's rights, especially voting rights. This was the first convention of its kind. On August 26, 1920, the 19th Amendment was adopted into the Constitution, granting women the legal right to vote, but it did not guarantee all women this right. The laws, particularly in the South, barred African American women from voting for decades after 1920. It wasn't until passage of the 1965 Voting Rights Act that these women obtained suffrage as well. Others also had to continue the fight. Chinese American women fought for the right to vote until 1943. Japanese and other Asian American women until 1952. Hawaiian women didn't obtain the right to vote until 1959, when Hawaii became a state. American Indian women were only able to win the right to vote by fighting for it state by state, with Utah as the last state to guarantee voting rights for Native Americans in 1962. Of note, the Alaska Territory granted Alaskan women full voting rights in 1913, well before statehood. In 1970, Congress established Women's Equality Day to celebrate the ratification of the 19th Amendment as a major step to remove barriers to women's full participation in American public life. This observance has grown to include focusing attention on women's continued efforts toward gaining full equality in every aspect of life, personally and professionally. At this time, I'd like to invite our Director, Lieutenant General Ronald Place, to share some brief opening remarks. Sir, the floor is yours.
Well, thanks, Christianne, and thanks everyone for joining us. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. Although I'd much prefer to be with all of you in person, I'm grateful for the DHA Resilience Office and so many others to put in all the efforts to allow us to connect virtually. Christianne, as you've already mentioned, technically Women's Equality Day is an acknowledgement of the 19th Amendment and the suffrage that goes with it, but suffrage being a hard-fought, significant milestone for women in pursuit of what they rightly deserve. But I want us to get lost in that achievement because it isn't the end point. Even as we honor the decades of agitation it took to achieve the right to vote, the lectures and marches and lobbying and civil disobedience, and the personal toll that it took on so many, we can also appreciate that the work goes on. The right to vote was just one aspect of a broader societal implication of being a woman in America. The pursuit of equality is really much larger. And to me, equality doesn't have a look exactly. It's not a specific number of things or people or places or positions. But for me, equality is it's a feeling. Equality is measured by the happiness someone has in their life, the ability to say yes when someone asks them, do you feel like the opportunities and tools you have are allowing you to pursue your unique version of happiness? And when the answer to that question is yes, the equality feels calm, feels comfortable. We'll recognize that feeling because it's the opposite of the agitation, as I mentioned, that it took to fight from 1878 until 1920. I mean, 42 years to make that happen. Quite frankly, it's also the opposite of feeling unheard or undervalued for your work or at home. We'll know we'll have equality when people stop talking about it. Not because they're shut down, but because they feel a deep sense of fairness and again, calmness in their own pursuit of happiness. Working toward that end, we often need to initiate thoughts, programs, data, measurements, all kinds of stuff. And sometimes we look at women at the table or women in leadership roles or how we assign mentors to women. I'm good with all that. Those are good things, but they're means. Don't confuse them with the true outcome of equality, which I personally don't think we've yet achieved. Within our organization, I see the pursuit of women's equality in every aspect of the DHA's priorities. We can't achieve great outcomes without satisfied patients. So do our female patients feel respected, irrespective of their gender? Do they have appropriate access to the healthcare that meets their needs? Do they feel empowered to advocate for those same healthcare needs? Similarly, we can't have great outcomes without a fulfilled staff. So do the women who work in our organization feel heard and valued? And do they believe that they can obtain their vision of professional success in our organization? My expectation is that every element of the Defense Health Agency is monitoring and assessing gender equality to work towards fulfilling those gaps where they currently exist. Because we just fundamentally know that diversity of experience, diversity of ideas, diversity of expertise, of problem solving, decision making, all of that makes us better. And it sets an example for our communities, for our country. It sets an example globally. And to truly understand where gaps exist, we need to be asking questions and invest in the research and the analysis it takes to know what women need for their health, for their social and professional happiness. That's the only way we'll achieve our mission in military healthcare. So as an organization, there are opportunities to ask those questions on big and small stages. An example of a big stage, the military health system has an opportunity to learn from and integrate with the most recent findings of the Women, Peace, and Security Act of 2017, and then playing a bigger role in helping the department implement its tenets. An example of the smaller stage is, well, right here, right now, this forum today, which is why I'm thrilled to be here today and hear from an exceptional leader, a personal friend of mine, General Krueger, and listen to all of your questions. Everyone in our workforce, and I mean all of us, has a role to support and empower women. I'm looking forward to your presentation today, General Krueger, and the discussion that follows. And I'm going to be taking some notes. So Christianne, back to you. Thanks again for the privilege of opening the event.
Thanks so much, sir. Now I'd like to introduce our guest speaker, Brigadier General Mary V. Krueger. She is the Commanding General at Regional Health Command Atlantic and assumed her duties in June 2021. She received her doctorate of osteopathic medicine in 1995 from Philadelphia College of Osteopathic Medicine in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. She completed residency training in family medicine at Madigan Army Medical Center in Fort Lewis, Washington. A fellow of the American Academy of Family Physicians, she's board certified in family medicine and is an Army flight surgeon. Brigadier General Krueger is married to Joseph Izaguirre, and they have 5 children. One of whom I might add is a recent graduate of A School at Fort Gordon as of last night. Yes. So military service absolutely runs in the family. Without further ado, let's begin this important discussion on women's equality and how the inclusion of women has helped strengthen our military and our nation as a whole. So ma'am, let's jump into these questions, shall we? So we'll start with the first question. If you could share with the group, who are some of the women, both civilian and military, throughout our nation's history that have inspired you to serve? And what about these women inspires you the most?
Yeah, well, thank you, Christianne. First, thank you for the opportunity to be here, sir. Thank you for the invitation. I'm grateful to have a chance to converse, even if from a distance right now. But very grateful to be here and talk about this important topic of how do we ensure that all of our strengths are brought to the table. And I think as we look towards history, we absolutely have a lot that we can learn. We absolutely stand on the shoulders of giants, many of whom who have fought through significant biases. And when I think about who do I really respect and who have I learned a lot from, there's some commonalities. These folks have been patient. They have been persistent, and they have shown courage in bringing value to the table. And I really think that's what we in military medicine are about as well, is how do we bring the most value? And so when I look back and I look at people like Elizabeth Blackwell, the first female physician here in the United States, and we look at the number of times that she ran up against no as an answer, the number of times that she faced ridicule for pursuing this, but her commitment to serving others through medicine and bringing her talents to bear. I think that's something that we can all learn from, because it's been said that anything worthwhile is hard work.
Absolutely.
And I think that came to bear. And the other thing I really admire about Elizabeth Blackwell is that she was not only a trail breaker. So I have the privilege of commanding up at the Army Medicine Forces up at Fort Drum, and I learned to snowshoe with them. Sir, they might have taken you snowshoeing when you were in this role, and you might recall the breaking trail. And that's where, when you're going through the snow in your snowshoes, it's the hardest part, the person in front, and you expend a lot of effort. And oftentimes that trail breaker isn't the first one to get to the end state because they've had to work so hard. But the trailblazer might be behind them. They're the first person to be able to come to completion. But then the trail builders, and I think this is where we have a lot to learn and where we can take on a task for ourselves, is how do we build the trail so that as we continue to move towards a world where people are contributing based on their competence and their character, instead of some other artificial restrictions that might be getting in the way of that, that the trail is built such that our enterprise can benefit from the collective talent and the best talent that comes to bear. So Elizabeth Blackwell is one of those folks. Another person would be Mary Walker. And interestingly, and I didn't know until I started looking into this for our conversation today, is Mary Walker went to the med school where Elizabeth Blackwell had been the trailbreaker. And so then she was able to be that trailblazer in military medicine, being the first surgeon in first female surgeon in military medicine. But again, she certainly wasn't welcome with open arms. Quite the opposite. She was told multiple times no, but multiple times based on a conviction that she had value to bring and that she had a purpose to serve, she persisted. And I know that's become a popular saying here, but I think there's something to learn from that persistence, that commitment to a value, commitment to bringing value, commitment to serving, all things that we in military medicine are comfortable with. And then that persistence that, ask yourself, am I really doing this because I'm passionate about the mission or passionate about my position? If it's just my position, I probably need to take a step back.
Right.
But if it's because I'm passionate about the mission and I have a conviction, then continue on with that and continue moving towards that. And then, a final person that really comes to mind and stands out for me is Maya Angelou. And she's someone who had a unique perspective to bring, a perspective that really sprung from a lot of difficulty in her life, such that she even went through a period that she was mute. Is that ironic that someone who speaks so beautifully and it was a prolific writer was mute for a period? But yet she persisted. And she never wasted a crisis. And this really was, if we look back in our nation's history, the beginning of World War II, when a lot of men were at war, our nation had an opportunity to move forward and see what value women could bring. Maya Angelou was one of those women. Mm-hmm. She was actually the first African-American female streetcar conductor in San Francisco. Mm-hmm. Turned down for that job several times, but she persisted. So I think as we look at these women who have really blazed trails and so many more like them, some commonalities. They brought something that benefited so many. I mean, Maya Angelou, how many people have her words really captured what many of us thought but didn't have the talent to put into words? Mm-hmm. Had she taken no for an answer, our nation would be deprived of that gift. And then again, Elizabeth Blackwell, Mary Walker, people who are giants upon whose shoulders we stood. And it wasn't that right after they served or right after Maya Angelou started working that all of a sudden all doors were open. Right. No, that's where those trail builders came in. And that's where I see a challenge to us, a charge to us, is how do we build upon the courage and the persistence and often the patience of those who have come before, to make sure we're doing the most good we can.
So just an incredible metaphor. I've never had it actually unpack that way. I think we hear trailblazer used often, and I so appreciate how you're explaining to all of us the role we have to play across that spectrum, acknowledging the role of the trail breakers, but then the charge for us to continue to pave the path for those around us. That's just awesome. And Maya Angelou really struck a chord with me because I am a huge admirer of her work. And there is a quote of hers that really resonates with me and may resonate with many of you, and it is about belonging. She had a famous interview where she was asked, "Do you feel you belong?" And she said, "I belong no place. I belong every place. No place at all. The price is high and the reward is great." And it took me a while when I read that. It was in a Brene Brown book to unpack, what does this really mean? But I think it's what you're talking about when you feel a conviction and a passion about showing up and pursuing something, helping others. You may not always feel like you're warmly embraced and feel that you belong, but to stand grounded in your character and your principles and your passion, I think can help pave the way for others to speak out. And so I love that you referenced Maya Angelou and the other medical leaders as well. So next question. What does it mean to recognize the dignity and equality of women? And what can we learn from history? We've touched on this a bit about the actions that are needed to publicly recognize this human right of equality.
Yeah, so much like General Place explained, equality it is when we know we're there when we don't have to think about what somebody's heritage is or what their gender is or what their background is to know what their value is. We're basing it on their competence and on their character and what they bring. But it would be naive to say that we're there yet. Yeah. And so I think one of the ways that we can do that is to really talk about what unconscious bias is. And unconscious bias, the first time I really thought about this was when I worked in the Pentagon at one point, and I was working on some policy. And if you had told me that I was going to ever be somebody who worked on policy, I would have, I would have said, nope, I'm a simple family doctor. Role. Right, exactly. But when we can be open to, and that was one of my unconscious biases. I realized I had this unconscious bias about administrative work, and I was never going to. And even today, when people ask me, well, how do you feel that you're now an administrator? I'm like, what are you talking about? That's not, but we all have biases and labels. Yeah. And so to not be restricted by that and to look at what is unconscious bias. So what can we do about it? So when working in policy and in the Pentagon, which I would encourage everybody who is joining us today, if you have not yet had the chance to work there, embrace that chance. Believe it or not, it's a fantastic place to learn and to understand our government and to really combine that understanding with your natural strengths and make a difference. So if anybody'd like to talk about that later, I'm happy to engage. But I learned about it because then Secretary Fanning was working on unconscious bias policy. And it again, as General Place said, it wasn't certain numbers or requiring this, but it was to getting after how do we open our minds to actually understand where our unconscious biases might lie. And so his policy had to do with hiring practices. And it didn't say you will hire these people or you will hire from this group, but it did say that your panel needed to have diversity.
Okay.
Because what we found was that slates the right word, slates, the criteria that were being used to build slates introduced a significant amount of unconscious bias. So he challenged us to say, hey, is it a requirement that, for example, this slate, everybody has to have attended Ranger School? Well, at that point, that would mean that that slate was only male. And was that really a requirement for that job, or was that a tradition that had been built upon? So a lot of it was getting comfortable with asking ourselves, with challenging our assumptions about what was required.
Right.
And so that it did require us to slow down a little bit, which oftentimes we are challenged to do. It did require us to challenge our own assumptions. And like I said, we all have them. I mean, that's by definition, unconscious bias means you don't realize it. And so it takes some very intentional work to question those things. And really the other part is by doing exactly what we're doing, having these conversations. Another person that I admire in recent history, actually current, is Major General Jill Ferris, a fantastic military medical leader. And she said recently, in order to be it, you have to see it. And so as we have the discussions and as we talk about where can people contribute, where do we bring value, we can ask ourselves what biases are set in stone and what biases aren't. I have some experiences that I've had along the years regarding what are requirements even for our military jobs, and how do we combine the fact that women serving in the military have a significant overlap between their family life and their most prolific reproductive years and their military careers. Yeah. And how do we work in a way that recognizes that and honors both? Yeah. Yeah.
I'd love for you to speak a little bit more. You'd mentioned that about some personal decisions you made to honor both your desire to serve and your desire to be a mother with one of the assignments earlier in your career.
Sure.
If you're comfortable.
Oh, yeah, sure. So early in my career, Christianne mentioned, we were blessed with 5 children. Our oldest, Connor, in 1998 was a little guy, and I got the call. I was married to his dad was a company commander at the time, pretty busy job. And I got the call, hey, we need somebody they called it deploy back then. It was really a prolonged duty in Germany. Okay. Because the folks in the German hospitals were going into Kosovo, and they said, hey, we're really sorry. We know you have a young baby, but we really need you to go. And I thought about it for a moment. I'm not sure what caused me to say this, especially since I was the only female in my residency class that I just graduated. So I didn't have a lot of folks who were in my same shoes. But I said, well, that's okay. I'll just take the baby with me. And they're like, well, you're going to have to pay for that. I said, well, of course I do. He's my child. But it was an assumption that I was going to have to make the choice of going to Germany or taking my child. Well, my husband was a company commander, so and we didn't have parents who were in a position to help us. So we figured it out. My nanny happened to be from Germany, and anyway, with a little luck and a little determination, we were able to do both. And it was interesting. Some of the resistance I faced during that time was people came in, they said, well, you're going to have to work. And I said, well, of course I'm going to have to work. But the assumption that you couldn't do your job and do both. So I think for us making those choices later on in my career, I had the privilege to command in Hawaii, and my oldest son has Asperger's. And so for him, moving is really hard. Yeah. And so my husband and I talked about it, and we said, you know what, right now we're going to do whatever we can to stabilize our children. If of course, if the Army gives us an assignment that's somewhere else, we will salute and follow on. But what that meant is at that time, I wasn't going to put my name in the hat for command, because that would by almost definition mean that we're going to be moving more. Yeah. And I talked to the Surgeon General at that time, General Horho, and I was very upfront with her. And I said, ma'am, I appreciate that you have so many talented colonels. I would love to serve in the next command, but right now my son needs some stabilization. So I won't be putting my name in the hat for command, not because I don't want to serve there, but just because he only has one mom and you have a whole bunch. If there's space for me when he's out of high school, I'm grateful for it. If that chance passes, I know, but it was an intentional choice.
Absolutely.
And so I feel very fortunate that it worked out as it did, and I'm grateful for the chance to serve. But that's why when I'm speaking with other officers, male or female, it's that acknowledgement of trade-offs. That's why I don't use the term balance very much, because I feel balance is something you're either succeeding at or failing at. Whereas trade-offs, you're making intentional value-based decisions and bringing the best that you can to each, but also being transparent so that we can make decisions based on a shared understanding.
Yeah.
So I think all of those, and then as other people see that, then they say, well, maybe I can make family choices. Maybe being in the military medical system doesn't mean that I'm putting my family second, but it means that I make trade-offs at times, and I give the best that I can to each. But sometimes I'm a good mom. Some days I'm a good doctor. Some days I'm a good commander. Some days I'm a good wife, but rarely is that ever the same day. And luckily I have people with a lot of grace in my life, and I try to communicate to them so we all understand when those days are going to be.
I so appreciate you sharing your personal experience, because I think you're living testament. Then you talk about trade-offs, but that you can balance, you can find a way to manage both. I know many female service members have been challenged with similar trade-offs, and here you are standing before us as Regional Health Commander Atlantic, having found a way to do both. And I respect that so much. And I think it's helpful for folks here to see how you have perhaps helped break a trail for others that maybe they didn't think, oh, I could be a single mom and take this TDY assignment or what have you. And I see that resonating here in the chat from Laura Reyes, recognizing the service to our country and also the service to family. So great.
Well, and if that, I do have to say that all comes with acknowledging that my family pays a huge, they pay a huge price for that, and it's a conscious price, and I could not be more grateful, because that's if anybody has ever asked me, well, how do you do it all? I said, I absolutely do not do it all.
Right.
I have a lot of help. I have a lot of fantastic friends who are patient with me, who also give me the firm, honest feedback when I need to have it.
Truth tellers.
And truth tellers, yes. And I realized that my leave time and my time at work site is not mine alone. It's my family's as well. And so I try to be very conscious of that to honor them as well.
Absolutely. And that the chat is blowing up, because I think a lot of folks that's resonating. And so and yes, acknowledging that there are some challenges and trade-offs that we face as we try as women to balance career and family. So thank you so much. Keep populating the chat with your thoughts. So let's go. We've touched on this, but let's unpack really where we are as a military and a military health system. At least from my vantage point, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. It does seem like there are great opportunities for women, particularly in the medical community. But what additional steps do you think we could take to affirm dignity and equality with women who serve and the career fields available to them?
Oh, it's a great question. And so I agree with you. I think that we have made great progress. I mentioned when I was in training, I was the only female in my residency class initially. And then there was one in the class ahead of me. And we had one female staff, but she was on the other side in the operational medicine piece. So, and now over half the women in medical school are, half the people in medical school are women. And then if you look in the leadership positions in military medicine, I think we really are benefiting from people strengths across the board. So one way that I think we can do it is and continue to do it is look at strengths-based leadership. I think women historically have felt that they do have to do it all. Earlier on, and I had this conversation with some of the staff at Region, and we had a great, very rich conversation. We had everything everyone from myself, colonels, my aide, who's a first lieutenant, who is phenomenal. She's another woman I admire in military medicine, because looking at all that she does and knowing where she's going to be able to go. But one of the colonels brought up, she said, you know, in the previously, it's almost like we felt like we had to make excuses for, like we would kind of sweep under the table that we had a family or that we had those commitments, and we would almost make excuses for it. And it was interesting. Admiral Bono, when she was here at DHA, she said it was interesting that when she started opening doors and being very intentional about communicating about family time, that oftentimes the women were the last ones to actually take advantage of that, because again, it was that tradition of, well, I have to kind of pretend I'm putting it on the back burner. So I think having the discussion about being full people across the whole range, there's great research to say that people who have a better and you determine, the literature is often used balance, but have more balance between work and home life. And home can be so many things to so many people.
Of course.
You know, so for some people it's their kids, for some people it's their friends who are family, for some people it's their fur babies, for, you know, there's a huge variety. But understanding all of that and understanding that we actually are much richer and bring more to the table from the diversity of our experiences and the diversity of our thought.
Absolutely.
And that if work literally is your life, you're going to have much greater blind spots.
Absolutely.
So I think as we continue our conversation about what does success look like, and for leaders to set that example by taking that time and recharging and not having to pretend to be Superman or Superwoman, and realizing that we bring the best value by being part of well-rounded teams and capitalizing on our strengths. I'm a huge believer in strengths-based leadership. And that's where I can say, you know what, you are so much better at communications, or you're so much better at leadership. And I'm not threatened by that. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to look to you in our organization for bringing that. And that way I don't feel this weight of, I have to be everything to everyone. I can capitalize on what is my strength. Maybe maybe I'm a good strategic visionary. Maybe I'm not good at managing my calendar. So somebody else can help me with that organizational piece, and I can, help looking into that. So I think in all those ways, acknowledging our humanity and acknowledging that we bring strengths as individuals, and we bring that full capability as a team. And that builds trust and interreliance, and again, helps us each to bring our best self to the table.
Absolutely. So a couple things that come to mind as you're talking about this is, one, having just a solid sense of self-awareness and knowing where your strengths lie, and then a sense of humility to know that you can't possibly do it all by yourself, and how to tap into those around you. And I think also just a sense of empathy. We haven't brought that word up yet, but I do think that is an important piece of, as we show up as our whole selves in the office environment, the importance to have leaders who are empathetic to very real needs that can come up with our family, and just with our people. And I do think that's a huge value women bring to the conversation, is empathy and an understanding of what their teammates are going through, perhaps more attuned. Maybe that's an unconscious bias I have. Maybe not.
It can be, but the thing is, we can each learn from each other. And that's the thing is, when I have had these conversations with people, we are each equally valuable. That doesn't mean we're each carbon copies of each other. In fact, hopefully we're not.
Absolutely.
Because if we were a carbon copy, boring, and we'd have blind spots.
Absolutely.
Whereas if we each are equally valuable, and we value the different skills and talents, then we're going to have that really big 360. And I see somebody in the chat has said that the Clifton Strengths Finder is a wonderful tool. I make no money on it, no endorsement, but I have found it to be very useful, because it gives you permission to say, you know what, out of 35 strengths, here's my top 5. And I don't really need to focus on the bottom 30, because I'm going to bring much more to the organization by focusing on my top 5.
Yeah.
But again, and I find personally, I will always look at what are my bottom 5, because I'm sure I can fix them.
Right.
But you know what? I can't. I can't.
Right.
Not without taking
energy
away from what I could really be bringing to the organization.
Absolutely. I so appreciate the dialogue here, and I see it's resonating in the chat. So keep your thoughts coming, folks. So we've got our last question, and then we're doing great on time. So we'll be able to open it up too for folks out there in the chat. So how does publicly recognizing the dignity and equality of women strengthen specifically our health, our military health system, our military and our nation as a whole? I know the director referenced some of this in his opening remarks about our commitment to women's healthcare and acknowledging we have women who serve in every clime and place. And so I was hoping you could talk a little bit more about how that shows up in our commitment to healthcare access to our female service members we serve.
Sure. Well, so you start off asking about the public recognition, and that goes back to General Ferris's comment regarding in order to be it, you often have to see it. Now, there's some people who are trail breakers who see it in their mind, but they're few and far between. Many of us need to see someone who is gone where we've been before in order to have that vision to go forward. So I think that's where the public recognition comes up. It opens those doors of possibility. It gives us a better chance to stand on the shoulders of giants and move that trail a little further, maybe widen the trail a little bit, but to help people see what is within the realm of possibility. Because we have such varied life experiences. Some folks' life experiences might have taught them that those doors are shut. And it really takes some seeing it publicly and recognizing it and rewarding it in order to make that look possible. The other thing is we often get more of what we recognize. So if we recognize that sort of innovation, if we recognize that diversity of thought, there may be more acceptance across our formation. It's okay to talk about that I'm more than just who I am in this job.
Right.
It might make me think, well, maybe I could do something else. Or I'll tell you, actually, back to strengths-based, I was at a command and I had a employee who was not doing great.
Okay.
And I brought them in and I asked them, well, what's your passion? Yeah, I got curious. And that's the other thing I think that this whole discussion leads us up to curiosity of what talents do people have. And the person shared with me that they were not really passionate about the role we had them in at all. It just happened to be the job that was open at the time they applied.
Was it policy?
No, it wasn't policy. It was administration, but not the, but then they told me this fantastic skill they had in history with the VA, who happened to be a liaison that we were struggling with our relationship. Yeah. So I got a little daring, and that's another thing I would say is take a chance. And I put them in this other position. Not only did they become good, they became great. They took our liaison program with the VA beyond what anybody could. They became the head of this whole effort, and they were happy because nobody comes into work and says, "Yeah, I'd really like to be mediocre."
Of course, right. So
that was like a turning over a rock for me, and said, by having that conversation. So now whenever I have in a situation where an employee is really having a challenge, I do get curious. And if it's appropriate, I talk to them or I have talked to offer to their supervisor, hey, have you thought about asking them if they're passionate about what they're doing?
Right.
And kind of 10 times out of 10, it's been no.
Yeah.
And sometimes they're able to find a place in our organization where they can pursue their passion. Sometimes they find somewhere else. But bottom line is, I think as it ties back to women's equality, seeing all the talent that lies within our organization and not having it being limited by traditional roles. So as we recognize and publicly amplify where people are succeeding, again, I think it opens people's eyes up to possibilities, both within themselves and within their organization.
Right. I think that's an awesome example. I think sometimes we can be our own worst enemy of not putting our name in the hat or thinking that we can't compete. And sometimes it just takes a little nudge or getting curious from a mentor or a supervisor to really help us see what we're truly capable of. I know I personally have benefited greatly by having supervisors get curious about my passions and giving me opportunities I would not have necessarily had if they weren't genuinely looking out for my interests and looking to help me explore some latent talents and passions. So I'm grateful for that, to include moderating wonderful panels like this. So I appreciate this really rich discussion and opportunity. Did want to single out a few folks in the chat here before I get to our kind of part two of the question. I see Trish Palmer writes, after 2 years of active duty and 28 years in a male-centric VA world, and now 3 years at DHA, I so appreciate the sheer number of women I work with. There's such a sense of equality and respect toward our leadership and decision-making, both amongst ourselves and with our male colleagues. I treasure the collegiality and professionalism. Awesome, Trish. Maybe you could help be a recruiter for DHA. That sounds like a wonderful testimonial. I'm so glad to see that has been your experience. I've been here for a little over a year, and I too remarked as I was meeting with General Krueger this morning, the sheer number of women that are in visible leadership roles, and it has given me encouragement as well. I mean, you can't be what you can't see, and it does help to have that visual representation and mentorship, whether it's an SES track that you aspire to, or senior leadership roles. I've been very heartened to see that here at the DHA. We've got quite a few chats here. Let's see. Cruz Riera writes, I also think we hold ourselves to a higher standard to show an amen. We can do it all, and refuse to ask for help because we do not want to appear as weak. It is a vicious cycle, and great rewards come with great risk. I appreciate that comment, because I think sometimes it gets back to that humility. And I have seen modeled here for me, which has been very refreshing. You do not have to have all the answers. You do, as a leader, there is power in humbling yourself and hearing what others have to say and getting the answers from them or suggestions from them. You don't have to have all of that on your shoulders. I've seen that modeled here, and I've enjoyed seeing leaders kind of express they don't need to have all the answers. They just need to know who to go to.
Yes, and to have a good team, and frankly, by owning that we don't have all the answers, what that means is we, by definition, then have to extend trust to the other members of our team, and the best way to generate trust is to extend trust. So I think if there were probably three qualities that are so important in any organization is trust. Humility, because if I can be humble with the people on my team, then I can be open to learn from them and open to feedback. Whereas if I have to put on this persona about being the tough gal or tough guy, I'm really have this wall
where people see through it.
Exactly. Right. Exactly. Everybody sees it. I'm the last one to realize that it's not nearly as effective, as tough guy as I think it is. Yeah. But that, and then kindness.
Absolutely.
To be kind to others. Man, that's a fantastic litmus. So if I'm in a discussion or something's going on and it doesn't feel right, General Place kind of described in his opening comments that tension, that opposite piece. I ask myself if I'm being kind.
Yeah.
And in fact, it's something we use with my 5-year-old. Are you being kind? It's a pretty good litmus. So if we can answer that first, and then if I'm not, why not?
Yeah.
And is it something that I can address? And often it's tied into the humility piece.
Oh, you're making me think of a quote I actually have on an inspiration wall at home. It's a Sufi saying, and it says, before words pass from your lips, ask yourself, is it true? Ask yourself, is it necessary? And is it kind? And I so appreciate you mentioning that, because I think sometimes we can react in the moment and really don't realize how much impact our words can have on others, for good and for bad. And so kindness can be such a simple thing that we can extend in the littlest of actions to those around us, but really engenders trust and a sense of team. I love the extend trust to generate trust. You're making me think of former Chairman Dempsey and the book Speed of Trust.
Yes, it's an oldie but a goodie. Covey is
he would reference the Speed of Trust a lot.
It's a fantastic, not Major General Jeff Clark, a DHA alumna, would say, oftentimes it's not what we need to learn new, it's what we need to remember. And that we already know, but we just need to remember it. And I think Covey's Speed of Trust, I think I'm buying up all the antique copies that are out there to share with my young staff.
That's awesome. So what a rich discussion. There was a second part, though. I was hoping to get your thoughts, ma'am, as we talk about dignity and equality for women, what this means in terms of access to care for the service members that rely on us to take care of their needs in every climate and place where they're deployed. What does that look like for you and our commitment to women's health?
Yeah, so great question. And I will admit I have a bias. I've been a director of women's health back in my day. And even now when I skitter across the street to provide a little health care at Fort Belvoir, women's health is a very comfortable place for me. So I think first of all, it comes to acknowledging that women are a significant part of our patient population. And that we acknowledge that women's healthcare needs are valid and important. And this is something, again, military medicine, civilian medicine, we have a lot of similarities. And this is a rich topic of discussion in civilian medicine right now, is even some specific areas of like care for women in menopause, something that the military needs to think about as well. Access to care for women, because women are often times recognizing our society are still more often the ones that bring the children in for care.
Yes.
So as much as we enhance access to care and enhance the patient experience, one of the silver linings of COVID, I think, has been our increase in virtual health.
Yes.
Because recognizing that when we have the patient have to come to us for everything, come to our location, it can be a barrier. And so addressing barriers, whether it's barriers of language, when we do have more female healthcare providers, some women feel comfortable, but not to make the assumption. I had some female patients who actually, based on their own biases or their own experiences, wanted male providers. So I think really it comes to respecting our patients enough to have the conversation with them and not predisposing their preferences. And as providers, being open to the conversation of what does success look like for you? What does wellness look like to you? And then engaging, I think something I was fortunate to learn early on in my medical career was that the word doctor really has nothing to do with health care at its Latin root. It means teacher. Teacher. And so if we can be open to hearing what our patients need to hear or want to hear about their own health and helping teach and guide, versus a more traditional model of medicine that was more dictatorial. I believe that we will really serve our patients well and really help understand their needs and meet them where they are. And then offer that teaching of health and wellness that in the end, we believe would be better across the board, while also respecting where they are in that process.
That's wonderful. Comes back to listening, trust, humility, kindness.
Listening is huge. So that's one of the things that I think often female providers have more challenges. I'm on a lot of female physician chats and challenges because they can go long in appointments because they're listening. But if we, again, look at our healthcare system, how do we embrace a healthcare system that really gets to hearing the patient while having the access to care and while having good outcomes. And if you can do that at a good cost, there's your Nobel Prize right there.
There you go.
You've solved it all.
We've got a head nod from
So I won't say it's easy, but we should keep aspiring.
Absolutely.
I mean, keep aiming for something that is, if we're only aiming for what's within easy reach, we're really cutting ourselves short.
That's the low-hanging fruit. Absolutely. So just for awareness for those that are joining us, we do have a dedicated women's healthcare page on health.mil, and we've recently refreshed it because there's a lot of interest, as you can imagine, out across our community and really out in the public square about reproductive rights and just women's healthcare in general. So I invite you to check it out. I'll drop the link in the chat for really the range of services that we provide across the military health system for women, and also to educate their partners who serve alongside them to help them make educated decisions about contraception and so forth. So, oh, there you go. Tina, wow, Tina's on it. All right, boom, 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 fist bump for Tina.
Not surprised at all. That's who she is.
And she's not even in PA. Thanks, Tina. All right. So let's open it up. We still have 10 minutes. Sir, I'd like to see, does anyone have a question here? It's been such a great discussion here with you, ma'am. Thank you for being so honest and open. And I just think you're a great example for many of us. So it's been a privilege to have this conversation with you.
I'm grateful for the opportunity, and I am grateful for really the experience of serving in the military healthcare system. Like I said, I hope to continue to do it for a little bit, but I am grateful, and grateful for the all fantastic people we serve with.
Absolutely. Let's see. We've got a question here in the chat. Ma'am, I have a two-part of this from Laura Reyes. Okay. What was the hardest emotional circumstance you had to overcome, and how did you do it?
Oh, that's a great question, Laura. Oh, goodness. Well, so one that comes to mind, I don't know if there is early on. So I had the chance to deploy to Afghanistan early on, and at the time I had 2 small children. And someone approached me in a social setting, and and this was back in 2002. So pretty early on. I had grown up in a military healthcare system where I had been able to be a doctor, and while I had to work like a lot of working moms, I hadn't spent a lot of time away from my 2 small children. And so someone approached me, and they asked me what kind of mother I was, that I was willing to leave my kids and go over. And, they were so little, 2 and 4. How are they going to do it without me? And for me, my faith is important to me. And so at any time really clarity comes, I have to attribute it a lot to probably a little bit of what I've read before, and some divine wisdom. But I said, well, I'm the kind of mother that would rather have us fight our nation's enemies on their soil than come and fight where my children are threatened on our soil. I don't know that I made, and that those words had a lot more bravery than I was feeling at that moment. At the moment, I was absolutely feeling like, oh my gosh, she's right. What am I doing? I'm not going to be there for my son's first day of kindergarten. My 2-year-old, I'm going to be leaving him with a nanny and a dad who's also in the military. But yet it went back to checking in, and I wasn't deploying for my own glory. Frankly, it was something it had chosen me, not that I had chosen. But I was following through on a commitment, and I did. And you know what? My kids, they have been proud of me through the time, proud of our family's service throughout the time. And it allowed us to be grateful for the amazing community that was here for them when I couldn't physically be here for them. So, that was how one instance where that came into play. Thanks for asking.
Thank you for sharing such an honest in such an honest way. I think what you're describing too is truly the sacrifice that we have to make, that members of our military community have to make. And we all have our reasons, but at the core, it's love of our country. And those outside are never fully going to understand why we make the decisions we make. But I so appreciate you just sharing as you did. So thank you for that. Just hearing you speak, it's just a reminder of the absolute sacrifices that all service members make, but particularly those who are in a position of being parents. So thank you so much, ma'am. So, sir, I'm looking at the time. We've got I could see a lot of amens, a lot of fist bumps through the chat here. People really appreciating the transparency, and absolutely just gratitude. And what an example you set for your children, ma'am, in doing so.
Well,
you and your husband.
Some days I do okay, some days I don't. I'm sure they'll tell you.
Well, the fact you have 2 of the 5 kids that are pursuing military service, I think speaks to the example that you've set and your husband has set. So God bless you all. So I'm going to close this out, and then I'll turn it over to you, sir, for final comments. Today and every day, we honor those who've gone before us and the tremendous sacrifices they have made to serve in our armed forces and in our military health system. We recognize the women today who are reimagining the rules and, if not blazing, trail breaking and trail building for future generations. We're eternally grateful to the valiant women of the vote for refusing to be silenced. And we stand on their shoulders and recognize the great strides our nation has made We recognize there's more work to be done, but it's up to all of us to do our part in the communities in which we live and work. A workplace that embraces diversity and inclusion is a place where everyone feels empowered and safe to contribute and feels a personal sense of fulfillment. Our nation's continued growth and prosperity depends on our ability to foster such an environment. Sir, I'd like to turn the floor over to you for some closing comments.
Well, thanks, Christianne. We've had several discussions and panel sessions over the last several months. And today is just another great reminder of the exceptional talent that we have in the military health system. General Krueger, of course, is a great example of it. Thanks, truly. Thank you, General Krueger, for your thoughtful reflections, your advice to us, but also for your preparation. I think all of us learned something from the discussion today. So I'm gonna use some of what Christianne said and some of what you said. The first is, in the intro, Christianne said that Women's Equality Day is actually August 26th, which is 2 weeks from Friday. And you brought up a great concept. Christianne's mentioned it several times, the trail breaker, trail blazer, trail builder. So the challenge, I think, to all of us then is on August 26th, what are we doing to put another paving stone down? What are we doing to build upon that? Personally, right, individually and collectively, and how are we doing that? Because your words, they weren't just for the women in the audience, they were for all of us, which means that collective, continuous improvement is more likely when we all pay attention to that, and we pay attention to those who are closest to the ground truth. Clearly, the research that you did and the advice that you have. So, Christianne, thanks again for moderating another exceptional special observance event. And thanks, Mr. Reynolds. Your dedication, your efforts to advance military equal opportunity keeps these observations in the forefront of our minds time after time after time. I think I speak for everyone involved. Today was a really special day, and I'm so grateful for everyone who helped bring it to us. That's all I have from here. Christianne, back to you.
Thank you, sir. So I'll close with some inspirational words that actually Elizabeth Negron already put in the chat from our late former Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright. It took me quite a long time to develop a voice, and now that I have it, I am not going to be silent. Thank you all again for taking time out of your day to help us honor women who have bravely served our nation, and for joining the DHA and renewing our commitment to creating an environment that is inclusive to all. A special thanks to my wonderful guest speaker here, Brigadier General Mary Krueger. Boom. And Lieutenant General Place for your time and comments. Be on the lookout for the recording. We'll post it here in MS Teams, and it'll also be on Inside DHA shortly. That's our intranet site, info.health.mil. Thanks so much for joining, and we're out here.